This is a way more sensible beginning than I ever do. Video games can tell stories in a really interesting way, a way in which no other medium really can. Now, that sentence is so done and dusted. It's as old hat as video games are art. No, really. We have had these conversations for the last 2 decades and don't really need to have them anymore. But I think it's relevant in this case because if it weren't for the strength of the stories and the unique way that video games can tell them, we wouldn't end up with characters who are as incredible as some protagonists and NPCs end up being. Apart from things like phenomenal writing and immersion and the way that different things and systems work together to create a fully realized digital world, I think one of the things that makes it really easy for you to connect to characters in video games is when we have a situation where a game is taking like 100 hours or 150. That's not to say that you can't have incredible characters in video games that are much shorter. I mean, look at The Last of Us. But there's something unique about spending that much time with characters that I think it lets you see a different kind of evolution. And there's also the sheer investment on your side. You've been there for so long, you've been watching them for so long that when little nuanced things change, you're more likely to take notice. And also, character development and evolution can happen more slowly because there's more time for it to be spread out and the different series of events to unfold. This is something I think makes the Persona games really successful. For example, in Persona 5 Royal, you get to know those characters so well that you're incredibly fond of them, even though I think there's like 10, 15 confidants in that game. But given that the game's going to take you at least 100 hours, you get to know them really well. And there's also in-game tangible rewards and perks for getting to know them as well. One of the video game heavyweights when it comes to telling a story, not just end-to-end a main campaign, but environmental storytelling and the little nuances of what really make a fully realized video game world, is of course Rockstar Games. Now, somebody said on my last video when I had a Taylor Swift jumper on that I was a Swiftie, and yes, I am. But you know what else I am? I'm a Morganite. A Morganator. Please edit this out. Big call, but I would say Arthur Morgan is my favorite video game character of all time. And I think, okay, I've said he might be the best video game character of all time in the title, because if I wrote that would be confusing. But I'm gonna make my case anyway, and you can let me know what you think. I talk a lot in WhatCulture videos, both in my Just Saying, I was going to say franchise, no, limited series, and in the listicle videos that I've written about how much I love grey, complex characters that are hard to pigeonhole into a particular archetype or stereotype or the kind of protagonist that we see time and again. You know, we get the charming rogues and we get the sassy gun wielders. And I think there's something really lovely about what I think is a surprisingly skinny wedge of the pie that is truly complex and grey characters. I think that these are the characters that almost always fly under the radar because they're not showboaty. They're the opposite of showboaty. I think one of the things that's really interesting about Arthur Morgan is he's quite hard to pin down, and I realized this because I absolutely love him from having had the experience of playing him. But I was trying to explain the other day what I think is so incredible about him, and it's actually really hard to explain. So it's great that I'm here trying to do that to you, thus the preamble. And I think it is because he's not the leader of the gang. He's loyal to Dutch. Loyalty is probably the thing that you could pin most closely to him. And that's true whether you play him with high morality or low morality. He is loyal to the gang, and he will do anything for the gang. The gang comes first before, obviously, legalities, but before a lot of things, before not killing people and everything else. So there are a lot of things that make him easy to file away into a criminal category, and yet there's a lot about him that has this good-heartedness that really underpins much of what he does. Now, personally, I played him with high morality, so I would have experienced something a little bit different. But I think it's also in the humility that he expresses. The thing that always stands out to me and that I remember is his voice lines when you look in a mirror. And basically, he says things like, oh, like, you ugly bastard. And he says, no wonder they all leave you. And he's like, you're getting old. And he's like, look at that sour face. It's honestly kind of heartbreaking. I went to start this video and I'd just read through everything again to freshen my mind, because the 100 so hours I played of Red Dead 2 were a long time ago. And yeah, it kind of weighs on you. There's something I think, and I was reading in the comments of those videos, that I think a lot of people find quite relatable about that. There's this incredible judgment and complexity to the relationship that he has with himself. And you see that develop over time because the game is played over a pretty long period of time in his life. And spoiler alert, I'll just give you a countdown. When he realizes that he's getting sick, and when he's terminally sick, he even makes the point that it has fundamentally changed who he is. And it's made him reflect on his life differently and the choices that he's made, and most importantly, the priorities. He's a man of many contradictions as well. And I think it's interesting because if this was a less well-written characterization, or perhaps even a shorter experience, being a man of many contradictions might make him seem sloppily written or just vague as a character that's hard to connect to. But instead, I think it just makes him seem a lot like a real person. He's sort of detached and keeps people at arm's length and has that sort of reserved man of few words, but, willing to go do what needs to get done, loyal demeanor, that sort of cool classic cowboy. But he's got a sort of a soft heart underneath it. He does have that loyalty. He wonders to himself about, his old love and what life would have been like with them. Whenever you see him broing out with the guys, there's real connections there. He has real admiration for Sadie and a quite a substantial, complex relationship with John. There's a lot going on for Arthur in terms of how he interacts with the people around him. And as I said, the complex relationship that he has with himself. There's just so many shades to consider. And I think it's a kind of depth that you just don't really get. Not in video game characters, in characters from all kinds of places. It's really quite remarkable. And it has to be said, of course, that a lot of this too is Roger Clark's delivery. There's an argument to be made that perhaps there's an element of projecting onto the character what you want to see, and also you get out of it what you want to. If you played Red Dead 2 and you're just running and gunning and it's the story stuff isn't for you, that's totally all good. But I think there's something interesting about us being able to project ourselves onto a character. And when it's a character that is so kind of dragged along by the events around him, that's an unusual position to be in as someone playing a game and dealing with the protagonist. Usually now this isn't a role-playing game, but usually in an open world game, role-playing game, action adventure, we're the hero. We're the hero of the world. Not every time, but a lot of times, even in The Last of Us, you're central. The story is about you. But in this game, it's very clear clear the entire time that you are part of a gang. Not only are you part of it, you're not the leader and you're not in control. And perhaps that's something that's relatable as well. Arthur Morgan is pulled along by the events of the story and the whims of Dutch over and over again. And you and him both experience for dozens of, well, your hours and, years of his life on end, what it's like to be underneath that, to just have to haul ass and move camp because another of Dutch's harebrained schemes didn't work out. You both feel the frustration at Micah being the world's worst human and how much you just want to take him out. You tend to be right there with Arthur in a lot of ways. And perhaps the morality feeds into that quite effectively, because if you want to be more on the side of not the white knight, hey, Robin Hood cowboy, but the, we're gonna do whatever we have to do, give me your money cowboy, it feeds into either of those, but doesn't sacrifice the core of Arthur, the core of that complicated way that he sees himself, or ultimately his position that is a complete lack of power in the path of his own life and the path of those around him. It doesn't matter if you're a bad guy or a good guy, you're not the leader of that gang. And more often than not, you're not in charge of the way that story goes. And maybe that's a little bit relatable because of people looking at their own lives. I think there's something to be said about the way that Rockstar have so delicately and effectively built that character and that world that even though, we're dealing with the Wild West and a fictional character, the themes are massively relatable. And I think the fact that his character is clearly built up of all these contradictions and conflicting relationships and priorities and this morality that doesn't match up almost ever with the things that he has to do or with what he personally holds dear or what he would like to do. I think that's something that just sits in the core of the human condition, regardless of if it's the person just sitting here in a, game shirt talking to you, or if it's Arthur Morgan, or if it's you, or if it's, lots of other really well-written characters, fictional figures in media. By virtue of this being a video game, of course, Arthur is coming across all kinds of batch crazy NPCs that he often tends to greet with this sort of, it's almost closest to late Yakuza Games Kazuma Kiryu, where he kind of approaches it with this weird dad, okay, I'll get involved. And he's sort of just like, all right then, attitude towards the zanier people around him. He sort of just goes with stuff and has this, okay, I'll help out mentality. But there's something that's sort of a bit reserved about him that seems pretty core to the way he interacts with almost everybody, even the people he's closest to in the gang. He can certainly be dry and funny, but I think the best way of describing him, and it is such a useless word, but he's understated. And that sounds so boring and confusing, but I think when you look at it in the context of all other video game characters, Arthur is not the hero of Red Dead Redemption 2. He's not the hero of the Vanderlyn gang. If anything, he's a victim of the things that go on in that game. And I think that lets him be in a position where he doesn't exist on the bottom rung, nor does he exist on the top. And I don't think that's something we see very often. Sometimes you're the rebel outcast, you got to fight against the system. I don't know, maybe you're Corvo in Dishonored. You're coming right up from that bottom rung, needing to fight your way up through crazy odds. Or you're at that top rung being a hero, you're Link, you're the Dragonborn. Arthur's just Arthur, man. He's just a dude, he gets dealt a really hand. He has a history of lost love and making choices, some of which he clearly regrets. And it's funny, again, it sounds so boring, but he's just muddling through. He's sort of just getting by and going with the motions. And he often comes off as the straight man to everyone else's zany weirdo, which again seems like that would be the less fun option. But it's sort of housing this really interesting place for you to just find more relatability. You can live more easily in the avatar of a person who is fully realized as what is more of a normal guy than someone who's just this crazy enormous warrior with this incredible chosen one potential that they were always destined for. That's not to say Arthur isn't extremely talented beyond that of a normal guy. Obviously, he's as good as you are with clicking or controlling with a gun and all sorts of things he's fantastic at. He goes around helping everybody and robbing everybody. He's a complex guy. I could have just said that. Arthur goes around helping everybody and robbing everybody. He's a complex guy. I think getting to know him over the course of 100 hours, especially seeing the way he reacts to the things that happen with just this like restrained frustration, but leaning on the side of loyalty, especially towards the beginning. And then towards the end, just hitting into out and out frustration. And there's something also absolutely heart-wrenching about when he starts deteriorating and you are just so attached to him as a person because of how realistic he feels, because of how well-rounded he is and relatable, that it is painful when it gets late into that game. Well, if you're an empathy ball, I found it very sad getting into that game. And also everything Micah says, Micah can off. I already said it, but I think the most brutal thing, and it's funny, like I think some people definitely found it funny, but when he looks at himself in the mirror and says, look at that ugly mug, no wonder they all leave you. It's a point for comedy. And if you just wanted to hear that and move on, that's fine. And I don't dismiss that, but I do think there's something to be said. And the comment that I just read was someone saying, first time I heard him say that, I didn't know if he was talking to himself or to me.
Damn.
And I think that, again, kind of rounds out the way that he toes this odd line between comedy and self-deprecation, and at the same time, this sense of self that is complicated and fractured. And not to get too psychological, but he has shitty self-worth. I was trying to say it more delicately, but like, he doesn't feel good about himself for so many reasons. He beats himself up for things that he's done in his past, for leaving his love and wondering if he should have stayed, among 100 other things. And it's those things that make him such an interesting character to spend time with. And it's what makes the end of that game painful as hell. So well done, Rockstar. Thanks for the emotional damage.